Right. So welcome back, and we're at our plenary session now. So it is great pleasure to pass over the baton to Mark Jordan, who's head of education at the RSC, to do the honors for this next section and introduce Marcy Towns.
Thank you very much indeed. Incredibly honoured to be invited along today. Marcy, your work has huge reach in helping to improve chemistry education with all its linked impacts on endeavour and society. By way of a quick introduction about myself, my role is Head of Education at the Royal Society of Chemistry, and my team supports teachers of science and chemistry with the aim that every young person has access to an excellent chemistry education. We do this through our free resources, our policy work, professional development, regional support, competitions, and dissemination of research through our journal SERP, which many of you, I'm sure, will be very familiar with. RSC has recognised excellence in the chemical sciences for more than 150 years now, and our annual prizes acknowledge those who are advancing the chemical sciences through their work in education, innovation, policy research, and also working as volunteers as well. And prizes recognise individuals at different career stages, as well as groups, teams, committees, and collaborations. The flagship of our education prize family is the Nyholm Prize, and in 2019 this was awarded to Marcy, and for very good reasons, as I'm sure everyone understands. We weren't able to fully celebrate that in person because a rather big thing happened globally around that time. I'm pretty sure that everyone on the call knows who you are and your achievements. Indeed, many of those were included with the agenda, but just allow me to share a few of those before I ask Michael to hand over your prize. Marcy's made substantial contributions to the chemistry education community over a very long career, and she's highly regarded member of the international chemistry education community, having engaged with a variety of organisations, including ACS, UPAC, and the Royal Society of Chemistry, to advocate for chemistry education research and practice. Marcy was Associate Editor of Chemical Education Research for the JChemEd from 2012 to 2020, and has supervised over 25 CER graduates, chairing the recent 2022 Biennial Conference on Chemical Education at Purdue. Marcy's been awarded several notable accolades over her career, including the ACS Award for Achievement in Research for the Teaching and Learning of Chemistry, and the James Flack Norris Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Teaching of Chemistry. And from the RSC perspective, the Nyholm Prize. There should be a drum roll moment, I think, coming up now. But Marcy, for your outstanding contributions to the teaching and assessment of chemistry, climate science, and research increasing our understanding of learning in the undergraduate laboratory, it gives us enormous pleasure to present you with the 2019 Nyholm Prize. Michael, please, can you hand over the medal?
Right, so Nicole Gralish was talking earlier about the future, but this is really the future. This is quantum tunneling, right? So I've got the Nyholm Prize, and I'm going to pass it over to Marcy through my camera, and what?
Here it is. Look at that. It showed up. I mean, that is totally amazing. We did that across the Atlantic. I love that. So thank you so much. The first thing I would say is that I didn't get here by myself. I had wonderful mentors across my career and 25 wonderful graduate students who indeed I did consider part of my family, as Alina showed. But you don't get to this point all by yourself. You have great collaborators, people that inspire you. As the 4 talks did before, oh my gosh, they were great. And a lot of wonderful graduate students. So thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Michael. Thank you for this award. It meant the world to me to win it in 2019. And I can remember receiving a lot of email from my international friends and colleagues, you know, people like Michael and Felix and others who said congratulations, and it just meant so much. I truly wish I could have come to the UK and done my tour. But, you know, it didn't happen. It just, it didn't happen. And that was it. So, okay.
Please, Marcy, when you're in town, we'd love to host you at our
Oh, I'd
headquarters
love
in London. So do come and visit us there.
I love to. And for the people who missed it, because I was talking with Michael right before we all came back, I did truly watch all 10 seasons of Yorkshire Vet in the pandemic, and I really want to go to Yorkshire. It's beautiful, and I know maybe there's lots of cloudy, rainy days. Certainly they show some of that on the show, but it's gorgeous. So yeah, I'd love to get over there. So, okay. We ready? Should I go ahead and share?
So, yeah, you go ahead and share your screen, and we're
Okay.
good when you are.
So thanks, Jenny, for saying Yorkshire is fabulous. So a couple of quick things to preface what you're going to see. So I have graduated all my students. I don't have a research group anymore. And worse than that, I transitioned to being interim department head. So I'm now an administrator. But what I'm going to do is show you some things that many of you have seen before. There's an ode to digital badging coming up. You should expect that. But then I want to weave in a few things that we saw during the pandemic and end with a great magnum opus. So that's where we're going to go. Okay. Excuse me. Here we go. And there we are. Michael, we're looking at the right screen.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, let's go. So I'm going to talk a lot about learning in laboratory and talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic and some of the great work that's been done, especially by Michael and Hendra and others. So that's what's coming up. Okay. So probably everybody has a pretty good sense that laboratory, excuse me, is pretty expensive to do. It takes dedicated space. It takes dedicated equipment, which you then have to keep up. Every now and then you got to build a new laboratory building. And so we know it's one of the most expensive things that we do. And so we want to study the learning that takes place and what goes on in laboratories so that we can justify that expense. There is a bit of the research literature that might give us pause. Whereas if you talk to any of my faculty that teach in the undergraduate program who are not, chemistry education researchers, they would say, hey, lab is where science happens. And we want students to go to laboratory so that they understand the nature of science. So there's this really strong, unquestioned belief about the value of laboratory work. And there certainly is a little bit of an undercurrent of, well, they spend a lot of time there, don't they? And since they spend time in a room that has laboratory equipment, surely they're learning something. But even prior to the pandemic, there were questions from the literature that raise some unsettling questions, and they're from around the world. So they're in the early 2000s, there's a report out of Australia about tertiary science education that asked hard questions about, what is it that students really learn in laboratory? And then Chemistry Education, Research and Practice in 2007 did do a special issue about laboratory. And Reed and Shaw wrote, however, there's very little justification that's normally given for laboratory's presence. It's assumed to be necessary and important. And Hofstein and Mamlok Naman in the same special issue noted that lab had a distinctive role in science education, which is true. But there's a large volume of literature that has not shown simple relationships between lab experiences and learning. And there's also been a history across this literature of people asking for more well-designed studies that probe those learning environments. And then here's one that I feel like if we could put really ominous music in the background, I would. So this is the last paragraph, I do believe, of Stacy Lowry Bretz's op-ed in 2019 that was in the Journal of Chemical Education. And so thus it appears just months before the pandemic. And she wrote, you know, essentially, what evidence do you have for your department's investment in laboratory that it's essential and then it helps students learn chemistry? You know, what arguments and data would your department amass to defend laboratory instruction if your university administration decided that virtual laboratories and simulations would be far less expensive pedagogy that doesn't compromise student learning? You know, in light of where we are now in 2024, looking back at this at 2019, you just think, oh my goodness, could there have been a better time to ask those questions? So let me pull a few research threads out, and I feel kind of funny about the next study since Hendra gave one of the talks, and Hendra and his collaborators, this is his work. So Hendra, if I misquote anything, feel free to unmute and dive right in. So this is a truly important and comprehensive review about learning outcomes in the laboratory. There's an astounding 355 studies in this review. So for those of you who haven't done a review before, that's an extraordinary amount of work. And what's really important that comes out of this and helpful to the field is that this publication describes, you know, competencies that students should get from learning in the laboratory. So they're you know, learning outcomes that you would hope for. So there's experimental competencies that are about the practical skills in conducting experiments and how do you analyze and interpret data, how do you make sense of it, and pieces and parts as well about experimental design. There's disciplinary learning, so connecting the theory that students see in lecture to the practice. There's certainly learning outcomes around higher order thinking skills, you know, critical thinking, argumentation, problem solving, and metacognition. And then the next two actually were highlighted in Hendra's talk. So the transversal competencies, which have a lot to do with the social aspects, so the collaboration, the communication, and then the affective domain, which he just talked about. That particular review gives us a roadmap for future studies. And in Hendra's talk, one of the things that you said that I just loved was learning is so much more than thinking, right? So one of the things that Hendra and his team wrote about is that the practical skills are very rarely assessed. So only 14% of the studies had practical skills as part of what they were focusing on. And they also said that research and practitioners should support a higher level of integration between theory and practice and build out a more coherent curriculum. And that there's room for more investigation of those transversal competencies along the lines of collaboration and communication. And then in alignment with Nikita's findings, revisiting the assessment and the feedback that's given during laboratory is important to consider in the laboratory curriculum and important to think about what to do. So that the learning outcomes and the assessments are aligned and that there's formative feedback given. So one of the questions you can kind of ask, you know, pre-COVID is, well, how do we support student learning and engagement in the laboratory? And if you've heard any of my talks in the past, you know, 10 years or so, you know that I'm a huge supporter of digital badging. And forgive me, I know a bunch of you have seen these slides before, so I'll try to move right along through them. But a digital badge is an electronic credential. If you've heard of micro-credentialing, that's usually the phrase that's used now. But the notion is that a learner demonstrates that they've learned it, they can earn this digital badge, and then they can share it. And they share it on a wide variety of platforms. Again, where we are now, they share it on things like LinkedIn or various websites, places where people might want to know, well, what kinds of things can you do? I'm considering hiring you as an employee. So the idea of a digital badge and a micro credential has certainly moved out into the public place, away from institutes of learning. To build out a digital badge, you have to really think carefully about what evidence do you need. And in our case, the simplest badge that we did and that we thought was really critical because we were losing so much money, and I'll talk about that in a couple more slides, was how do you pipette? How do you use a pipette with a bulb? And I should tell you, if you're thinking, well, why wouldn't you use a micro pipetter? We do in the upper division courses, but in our general chemistry courses, they're enormous. So we have one course that has about 2,400 students in it, and another course that has 1,000, a completely different course that has 650. So we have these really large courses. And so we do still use a bulb on the end of a glass pipette. So to get to a digital badge, you have to think about, well, okay, if they were going to give evidence that they knew how to pipette, and in our case, that's going to be a video, you have to think about what evidence you would need, and you tell the students this. So you discuss these 10 items and you give it to the students. And I'm just going to show you some screenshots from Ranisha Watkins' video. So here she's showing you how do you squeeze the pipette bulb. And the next thing she's showing you is how far do you want to push it down on the pipette. You don't want to push it way down. That pushes out the bead in the bulb, and then it breaks the bulb for sure. And then she's showing you how you pull the liquid up into the pipette. And I will tell you, this wonderful video is from the first time that we ever collected student videos. And that was when we learned for sure that clear, colorless water in a clear, colorless pipette is pretty hard to see. We moved to colored water after this one. And then she's showing you how it runs out. And again, this is research, that we published quite a while ago. And what we can tell you is that we used a student survey to look at student knowledge, competence, and experience. And what we found were statistically significant differences in the student report data. And we also used some exam questions on the first exam and the final to check in on their learning. But the big thing that often people are pretty interested in is how much money did you save? So we've saved at least $30,000 US since implementing this. And what it comes from is not breaking those pipette bulbs at such a prodigious rate. And again, we have thousands of students every semester doing laboratories where they pipette. So the savings really adds up, which is kind of amazing. We also have badges in using a volumetric flask and making a solution, in using a burette. And we created advanced badges as well that are all scenario based. And if you want, sorry, there we go. If you want, those are the badging references that we've got. The newest thing that we put out was in the pandemic. We put out all the rubrics that we use. And what I would say now, with a 2024 lens, where we have learning management systems that can support video, and you can put a rubric in there, those rubrics give you a nice place to start. So that was something that we did in my research group. Sarah Hensick, now Sarah Hewitt, was really the lead graduate student on that. And I worked with my good friend, Cindy Harwood, who I teach with. And sorry, that was my dog. But the next big thing I want to show you is the person who came along next and really put digital badging on the map. And that's Michael Seary. So Michael took this idea. He came to a workshop of ours at the BCC, again, before the pandemic, and did all this wonderful work and thinking about, okay, well, how would you implement this in the laboratory? And came up with different ways to implement it. He wrote blogs, he wrote guidance, but he wrote this wonderful paper that appeared in JChemEd, and it became an ACS Choice article. So it's an article that was freely available, and was just amazing and shined a wonderful light on digital badging. So a big thank you to Michael for all of his work in this arena too. So that's a little bit about before the pandemic. And then, as we all know, in March 2020, or shortly before or thereafter, the whole world changed. And so for us at Purdue University, we made it until about spring break, and our spring break occurs, about the second week or so of March. And we told the students, okay, when you come back from spring break, everything's going to be online. So we had, 10 days to figure out how to take the rest of our curriculum for the semester and pivot it into a format that could be done online. So what we saw at that time, and is in the research literature and practitioner literature, were people who did things online. They did simulations, they did visualizations, they did kitchen laboratories. There were people who made extraordinary efforts to support both university level teachers and high school level teachers. They did things on Facebook. There were communities of practice that came together, and that was worldwide. So not just in the US, but across Europe, in Israel, many other places, across Australasia as well. But there are questions about meaningful learning that I'm going to pull two articles out and talk about. One happens to be an article that Jennifer Garcia and I published, and Jennifer was my last graduate student. But what Jennifer and I did, I'm going to pop up the data and tell you the big takeaway piece, so that it's clearer than having to dig through both of these visualizations of the data. So this was published in 2023. The first time we did this survey, we did it in fall 2021. Second time we did it was fall 2022. And what you're looking at are just the freshman students who were in our fall chemistry, general chemistry course. And what we asked them was, when did you take your year-long high school chemistry class? What academic school year? And then again, this is going to be student report data. It is what it is. We asked them, how many hands-on laboratories did you do in that year? And so in the top graph, what you see, the bottom, the bottom colored line is from 2018, 2019. The next one up is 2019, 2020. So then the pandemic hits. And then 2020 to 2021. So by then the pandemic is in full spring, and there's all kinds of disruption at public schools and private schools here in the United States. And where those hard black lines are at, that gives you a sense of the percentage of students reporting 5 or fewer hands-on laboratories. So before COVID, it's around, 25%. COVID gets going, it goes up over 40. And then in that 2021 school year, it's up over 60%. And then we asked the same question in the fall of 22. So that's the bottom graphic. And what you can see, if you're wondering, well, was this data anomalous or not? Well, what you can see is some fairly consistent data. So in 2019, 2020, it's up over 50%. In 2020 to 2021, it's going up to 70%. And then in 2021, 2022, what you would hope for is it falls back to 40%. It's still not to pre-pandemic levels, but the big take-home message is that the students we have in our curriculum right now who have been impacted by COVID do have drastically different laboratory experiences, and we need to account for that in our curriculum. And that's the big take-home message. Another paper that I'd like to, kind of pull out and highlight, and this was actually in Hendra's talk as well. It's Elizabeth Kelly's work that she published in 2021. It's a pretty interesting slice through laboratory during the pandemic. So what she did was she reviewed 91 studies, but they're essentially almost all from the JChemEd special issue about, learning in the pandemic. And it's fairly descriptive, and I would encourage you to read it. But at the end, one of the things that she really tries to shine a light on actually was inspired by a question that Michael Siri asked, and that's, what is unique in terms of learning objectives in the laboratory? And people have been asking that for a while, but she calls out Michael in her article. One of the things that she does talk about is that the lack of hands-on learning experience, it was detrimental in the pandemic, but also faculty took the opportunity to highlight sense making. So to really push on sense making, and that was, probably a fairly good thing. And then what she wanted to do was to look at all of these studies and propose a laboratory action-based theory that she came up with 5 pillars of what makes the laboratory a special learning environment. So, what are the essential sorts of learning objectives tied to laboratory? So she has doing, sense making, designing, or proposing what's next in the lab. The affective piece that we heard about earlier today, and the exploration piece. And what also was really interesting at the end of this article, beyond this theory, and you can kind of look back at Hendra's larger, 355 study review, and kind of look and see where do some of these ideas from Kelly's work match up to Hendra's. But one of the other things she did that was important is she talked about implications in future research. And she talked about serving that COVID-19 cohort. So my 2 cents worth is this is really important to do, because the students come to us with such different laboratory experiences in terms of not knowing the same names of glassware, not knowing how to use it, just being relatively inexperienced compared to other groups of students that we've had in the fall. But one of the things that she notes that I 100% agree with in the future of remote laboratories is that it is really helpful to have a curriculum that can be rapidly implemented. And there are a couple of different reasons you could think of that. If you have a disaster, so here in the United States, you have hurricanes, but you could have any sort of a disaster in your building where all of a sudden, if you couldn't use your laboratory space, what would be the curriculum that you would implement? The other piece is health-related issues, or I would say disability accommodations, which is something we have to account for here in the US. So for students who can't come to laboratory, having this remote curriculum does give us options to be able to assign a laboratory to a student who can't come to lab for whatever reason, and give them a fairly similar experience. It doesn't give them exactly the same things. There's probably more sense making, less hands-on, but at least we've got it. And then she talks about the future of face-to-face laboratories, and she talks about the importance of revisiting the learning objectives, carefully thinking through what are the learning objectives you have for laboratory. And she suggests prioritizing the lab time to practice the hands-on techniques and help students learn those, and shifting the non-technical competencies outside of lab. So what that leads us towards is, what advice would you give to practitioners? And we should all be doing a big drum roll at this point, because there is a magnum opus which has been recently published, it is a tour de force if you have not read it. It's deeply anchored in the research literature to come up with these 10 principles for guiding learning in the laboratory. And you know, across my career, I've always been interested in laboratory, and I've always loved reading Michael's writing about this. And I know Michael's got a whole team of people in here that helped to author this paper. And I think it's a really important work that's going to shape our field and be one of those pieces where people reference it for many years to come, because it will help them guide what should the laboratory curriculum look like. So I know that might have been a little bit different talk than you thought I was going to give. A little bit of my literature, a little bit of, hey, what did the pandemic do? And a little bit of where are we now and where should we go next? But I want to end with 2 more slides. So one of them is to thank Michael. So Michael, when he came to me and said, hey, I think we should do this, I thought, oh my gosh, really? And I couldn't be more grateful. So there's Mike. I know Michael has his hoodie, has a jumper on that says Purdue on it, but there he is in the dry fit t-shirt at the lower right. But he's been a tremendous leader for the field. He's the upcoming GRC chair. He's been an editor-in-chief for SERP. He's shaped MISER. He is generous, kind, good-humored, an exceptional scholar, and the 2021 Nyholm Prize for Education winner. So thank you ever so much, Michael. I can't thank you enough for doing this. And then the last thing, I really want to make sure that I thank those who helped me do all the research that you saw. So the COVID-19 project came from Jennifer Garcia. She is now an NSF postdoctoral fellow with Zakiya Wilson Kennedy down at Louisiana State University. Sarah Hewitt, who's now a professor in New Hampshire, I do believe, and then Cindy Harwood, who's been my partner in crime in doing a lot of different kinds of research. Collaborators Jason Fish, Kevin O'Shea, who are in teaching and learning technology. Brooke Robert Shaw did the pipetting study with us, and she's now, I believe, at Oregon State. There's past group members. There's collaborators from Miami University as well. Stacy Lowry Bretz has shared this interest in laboratory with me. So thank you ever so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. So thank you so much. So I can see you now, Michael. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So there you go. Happy to answer any questions.